I'm pretty sure he's an actual vampire at this point. Man hasn't changed. Doesn't look any different. It's been how many decades? This man's immortal. He needs to be investigated. He's a dangerous man. He's going to not be trusted.
Jared Leto?
Yes.
This is my roommate.
My name is Evan William Abramson. I am a student at SMCC. I am majoring in precision machining and manufacturing. My goal is to eventually get into the cargo ship business.
I've been living with him for the past 6 months, and well, I've noticed one glaring thing. He loves comic books. As the school year comes to an end, I want to know all about his love for comic books and how I can get into collecting them too. So come with me over the next couple weeks as I explore this unfamiliar world, featuring my roommate, also known as... I had no idea where to start with this new topic, so I decided just to ask him, why does he love comic books?
It's a good medium. It's an interesting medium. There's good comics and bad comics, but whether or not you like them, it's always an adventure at some point. You know, it's a short adventure. It's the point of comics are a nice little deviation from the main line characters you might know about. Short, sweet, and right to the point. And they come in multiple parts. It's like TV almost. Every issue of a comic in a series is like it's like a TV show, like a 3-parter maybe, where it's like Watery Grave, the Superboy issue, where there's 3 of them, where you can kind of read that as opposed to a book where you get to imagine it all in your head. Growing up, originally I actually wanted to be a superhero. I dressed up like Spider-Man and ran around the house. Yeah, and that's where my love for at least comics started. It all started with Spider-Man. It was my antithesis of a great hero and a shining example of what I wanted to be, and which is, I guess, part of the reason why I went down some of the paths I did in terms of short-time careers and hobbies such as firefighting and EMS, because it was just doing good and helping others as opposed to myself.
That is a really good and noble reason to love them, and I'll be honest, he had me hooked. But even if I did want to buy some, where could I even get them?
Bull Moose, and Newberry Comics is definitely another one.
So the next day, he took me to Newberry Comics.
Shit. This is art. That's my dad.
Would you consider getting these?
I think I'd rather take 2 cyanide pills than a Xanax.
He ended up getting this Batman comic. Now that I knew some things about where I could start collecting, I wanted to know about his personal collection.
Hello! Here's my comic collection.
So, he took his 2 huge piles out of his closet.
Nice.
Oh. And started to talk to me about them.
Those are comics that I really loved reading growing up, and ones that I've discovered today, such as Godzilla, King of the Monsters, short run with Marvel. Very interesting stuff, actually. Got some good old Batman comics, Scarface, a couple of these, and the more interesting ones I found were these Star Wars ones, where this is where Star Wars was getting its first heading, and it was getting adapted into all sorts of things, comics and other stuff. And it was really cool. It messed with the lore of it. They went very interesting with the lore, and they went to a lot of different aspects of the Star Wars universe that I wish they would go into more today. And such as like the Transformers comics, really neat stuff. As someone who loved Transformers growing up and loving all the toys and watching all the Michael Bay movies and the old cartoon where Optimus Prime dies, that movie, pretty sad, but cool. But yeah, stuff like that is just very interesting. It taps into the old imagination. The art style is stuff what inspired me as a kid, and some of the stuff I do now. All the different stories and the art style between each comic book artist is very different. You know, you take one like the old Spider-Man comics with Doc Ock, and you take a comic, you know, written by someone like Jack Kirby or Stan Lee, and then you take someone, you compare that art style with someone like the modern ones, and it's just contrasting the old and the new is just very fascinating. Comics themselves even can have their own gimmicks. like this Captain America and Iron Man one. Delving into like the more simpler and wackier era, such as, you know, the old Batman comics, where they introduced Mr. Freeze, or back when he was called Mr. Zero, which I'm glad they changed the name, obviously, but it's just so interesting to me.
I asked him what his favorite comics were and what characters he favored and liked to collect.
Some of my favorite comic book characters, personally, one of the wackier ones, I guess, is Captain Boomerang, which I have a tattoo of. And I personally liked him a lot because he was a more outlandish concept of a supervillain. Like your arch nemesis is the fastest man alive, and how do you plan to stop him? Boomerang. Morbius, despite how very painfully average the movie was, believe it or not, it actually got me into wanting to read some of his comics to see, oh, well, maybe this is better. And I love the art style of the older Morbius comics, and the stories were fascinating, and just the art was so gothic and very Sleepy Hollow-esque, and that really drew me in. A lot of the Batman villains were the most particularly interesting to me growing up, as well as the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery. Characters such as Mysterio, Mr. Freeze, especially Mr. Freeze. His story in general is just a very tragic tale of what you're going to do for love, and what you're willing to do, and what you're willing to lose, and what you turn yourself into in the end. And it's a fascinating story.
As he was putting his comics away, I asked him what his most expensive comic was.
A Carnage one, a Maximum Carnage for $40. That was about it. It was about this thick. It's a pretty average one, but I liked it. You know, good art. And that's my one Carnage comic, believe it or not.
I wanted to ask him about the movies based off comic books, starting with the MCU.
I think it's interesting. It's had its ups and downs, but for most of it, I believe that it's always going in sometimes a different direction. It's always got something that gets you, to pull you back in, personally. I think it's interesting how every time I think I'm bored of Marvel movies and the basic MCU formula, something new pulls me back in. My favorite MCU movie is Ant-Man, personally, because it's such a small story and it's a very tight-knit and very, it's a fun story. It's like a Mission Impossible. It's the point where it came out in time is what makes Ant-Man just personally one of my, and concept-wise even as well. It's just such a fascinating character. I think that's why it's my favorite MCU movie, personally.
What about the DCCU?
I think the DCCU has a lot of downs, but when there's so many downs, the ups particularly stand high above all. Every time there's a good couple of Wonder Woman 1984s, and all of a sudden you get the Batman or the Suicide Squad or an Aquaman, and you're like, wow, this really stands out for someone who fails so much. You know, the Suicide Squad, that really brought out a lot of love for characters that I knew existed long before the movie was even announced. Characters that I thought were just so fascinating, and it's cool to finally see them hit the big screen and be loved by so many new fans.
Those are some good choices for movies. I've yet to see the new Suicide Squad, but I have seen Ant-Man, and I have to agree with him. I asked him if there are any more local places to collect more obscure comics, and he told me about
Casablanca's got a lot of really neat comics, and it's more than just that. They got like posters, and I think that's a really cool factor to have more than just one thing.
We got to Casablanca Comics, and this place was crazy. So many comic books everywhere, from Batman to even Simpsons. This place truly had everything. As we were walking out the store, he told me about another comic book store not too far from that one. This comic book store was definitely a lot more packed and confined, but this had tons and tons of comics all across the wall, along with other nerdy stuff like an arcade cabinet. On the way back from town, we circled back on the movie conversation, and I asked him when he was going to see the new Doctor Strange movie. We decided to see it that weekend.
So where are we going?
We are going to see Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Very excited.
Alright.
Hyped. So hyped.
We jumped in my car, and I asked him,
What are you expecting to see in this movie?
I'm expecting to see Reed Richards and Charles Xavier have a very, very prominent role. I'm also expecting to see Black Bolt do some pretty cool things. I heard they're going to be in the Illuminati, so that's pretty cool. I'm expecting to see Howard the Duck standing over a destroyed, freshly destroyed, obliterated Pizza Hut. And he's eating a slice of Domino's, and he says, "Man, I could go for some KFC." I thought it was great. Pretty good. Pretty good. Above average, pretty good. Introduced some new characters, well, returning characters, while new to the MCU. Characters from the comics that I found. I'm like, oh wow, I haven't seen anything from this character in a while. Or, oh wow, they introduced this one part of the character that I thought was really neat. And granted, they didn't go the way I would have hoped for some of those characters. It introduces some interesting concepts, and I wish they did a little bit more with it. But otherwise, I thought it was good.
after a couple of weeks of immersing myself in the comic book world, I have learned so much and what it is all about. So thank you, Evan. You've got me interested in this new hobby, and I hope to continue it in the future. I even got my own comic book now. And I also hope you continue to collect for the rest of your days. And it's been awesome being your roommate and interviewing you over the past few weeks.
It's Morbid time.